Okay. Boker Tov, Morai V'Rabotai. We're continuing on Masechet Berachot, the fascinating daf in front of us, and we are on daf Lamed Gimel, Amud Aleph, 4 lines down from where the really wide lines start, by 2 dots. We had in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Omra bracha revi'it bifnei atzma. In other words, if you turn the page to the it's actually right over here in the top. The Gemara, the Mishnah said that you do havdalah in chonen hadat, and Rabbi Akiva says Omra bracha revi'it bifnei atzma, and Rabbi Eliezer says you say it in hodah. 3 different shitas. You say havdalah Atachor Antanu, the way we say it, in Chonen Hadat, which is the halacha, or you say it a separate bracha by itself, which would be not 19 brachot, but 20 brachot, right? Or you say it in Modim. That's the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, which we're going to speak about it momentarily, that the Havdalah is said not in Chonen Hadat, but in Modim. So says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Shimon bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Shimon bar Abba said to Rabbi Yochanan, Michdi, Anshe Knesset Gdola Tiknu Lahem Yisrael Brachot Tefilot Kedushot VaHavdalot. This is just, we started this, we're quickly reviewing it to have a whole thing today. That Anshe Knesset Gdola, the people of the Great Assembly, who instituted the Tefilot, Brachot, Havdalah, Kiddush, everything, they are the ones who did it. What is Shayach Machloket? How in the world do you have a dispute where it is? Well, you daven every week. How can you forget? What is it shayach to say? Where do you say Havdalah? Do you say it by Modim? Do you say it by Chonen Hadat? How did it start historically a machloket when you have it every single week? That's the question. Says the Gemara, let us see where they were metaken. And that should be it. What's the machloket over here? Amale, no. It says the history. Let me tell you what the history is. The history is, in the beginning, they instituted it to be said in the tefillah. Then they became rich. In the beginning, not everyone could afford wine. Wine was, somebody saw the Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim. Kiddush cup of the Chafetz Chaim himself. And it was so small that the one that the Yarshin did, the one that inherited it, was uncomfortable saying Kiddush on it. It would barely make the main shitot of the poskim of how much your cup should contain for it to be kasher. Right, not getting into the machloket. But because they were, every little bit of wine mattered when people were aniyim, when people were poor. So therefore, they instituted it, unlike Kiddush. Havdalah is not as important to be said on wine. This is a whole Gemara in Masechet Psachim, Daf Kuf Vav, and so on, that you have a semech for Kiddush. The question is, by Kiddush you say it on wine, together with Tefillah. But on Havdalah, they didn't do it, only on Tefillah, in Tefillah. Why? Because there you have Zochrehu, B'dvarim Hanimarim Alayayu. Says the Gemara. There you have a semech, at least according to the Tosafot in Psachim, you have a asmachta, according to the simple understanding of the Gemara, you have a real drasha that the Kiddush of Leil Shabbat, of Friday night, has to be said on wine. But Havdalah, you don't have it. So because they were poor, they instituted it and Shekhes Tegulah to be said only in Tefillah. So you say in Tefillah, Tachonantanu Shalom Al Yisrael. Then they became rich, right? Communally, the president changed, people became rich, and amen. And then they started saying it on Kos Shel Yayin only. In other words, they switched from saying it in Tefillah to saying it only on wine. But you know what happens? The Galgal HaChaim, the circle of life, it goes up, it goes down. People became poor again. They couldn't afford wine. They say, you know what? We're going to go back to the original takana. But it was already a good few hundred years. And now that they wanted to go back, especially because there's no sidurim to go research in the library to see what they did before, Not everyone remembered what was a few hundred years ago, a few generations ago. My great-great-grandfather's time, they used to say it in tefillah. So hence, it left room for machloket. And that's the historic reason why you have machloket where to say Havdalah. Okay, that's the answer to the question. Now the Gemara says, "Vehem amru," and they said, "Havdalah b'tefillah tzarich she'havdila lakos." When in the later takana, they said if you do tefillah, you should also do it on a kosher yayin, on wine as well. Itmar nami. It also was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan through Rabbi Chia bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan and Shekres Agdola tiknu lahem Yisrael Berachot 33a. The people of the Great Assembly, they did institute the tefillot, the berachot, kedushot, havdalot, all of those. In the beginning, they instituted it to be said on in Shemona Esrei tefillah. Afterwards, they became rich. They put it on a cup of wine, and then they became poor again. They instituted it in tefillah again. Great. So same thing in Braita. Itmar Nami, it was also said that Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, that both of them say, so you see, this seems to be supported so far from three different sources, that nowadays, when you say Havdalah in Tefillah, you should also say Havdalah. When you go home, still you should say Havdalah on a cup of wine. Now, you'll see why the Gemara is mechazek, strengthens this so much, because it's setting it up for a potential knockout, right? Which we're going to have a very interesting, all-time famous discussion, one of the most important things in the entire Gemara that actually comes up as one of the massive machlokets between the Ashkenazim and Sfaradim is just a few lines right now. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Rava said, we ask a question. If you didn't say, thank you so much. Let's say the Limud of Amud Yomi for Chodesh Cheshvan, it's been sponsored by Shahab and Sheina Zarabi for the health, prosperity of their family, and Hatzlacha, and growth in Torah, and should see nachat from all of their children. Amen. Also has been sponsored by the Hami family, the Ilui Nishmat Yosef Yosef ben Allegra Simcha bat Rachel, and Aliza Talia Sara bat Chanoch Feivel, and also that they should have much health and hatzlacha and nachat from their children. Amen. Says the Gemara. So we learned this before, that if you made a mistake and you didn't mention Gevurot Geshamim B'Tchiyat HaMetim, right now we changed from Morid Atal to Mashiva Ruach Morid HaGeshem, and you forgot to say Mashiva Ruach Morid HaGeshem, what do? Or imagine December 5th comes, or 4th, depending on the year, and you didn't say V'ten tal matar livracha. You didn't ask for matar in Birkat HaShanim, in the bracha of Barech Aleinu. Machzirin oto. You go back. Right? The reason we don't go to Sfaradim, don't go back for Mashiva Ruach is because we say at the very least, we say Morit Atal. So you have a baseline. So b'di'evet, if you forgot, you don't go back. For Ashkenazim who never have Morit Atal, if they forget Mashiva Ruach Morit HaGeshem, you have to go back and daven again. You go back to the first bracha. If you finish the whole Shemoneh, so you go back and daven again. That's the Gemara over here. V'havdalah b'choren hadat, but havdalah in choren hadat, you don't go back. If you forgot, if you daven the entire Motzei Shabbat Shemoneh Esrei Arvit, and you come back, Oseh Shalom Bimrumav, and say, gee, I didn't say Havdalah, I didn't say Havdalah, forgot. You go back and daven again? Says the Gemara, no. Why? Because you could say it on the cup of wine. Right? So that language of Yachol Le'omra ala kos, that you could say it on wine, indicates what? You could say it, or you don't have to say it. We just got finished saying that even though that you said it in the tefillah, you still must say it when you get home on a cup of wine. But now you're saying, well, if you forgot, you don't have to daven again because you could say it on the cup, which means you don't have to say it. Certainly, if you said Havdalah in Choren Hadat, you don't have to say it, but you could say it. So therefore, don't have to go back and daven a whole Shemoneh Esrei. Just go home and say Havdalah on a cup of wine. Anybody with me? Yeah. So therefore, it's a stira with the language that we just said. We just said, even though that you said Havdalah in Tefillah, you have to say on a cup of wine also. Mm-hmm. Now we're saying you could say on a cup of wine, indicating that's not an obligation to say it on a cup of wine. You could. It's optional. So if you forgot to say it in Tefillah, say it on cup. If you didn't, don't have to. That's the contradiction. No, that's a wrong language. Don't say because you could say it on a cup of wine. The right language is because you're going to say it anyways on a cup. In other words, it's going to be said, Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh Lechol, right? When you go home anyways. So even though that you missed the first one, you're going to say it again at home because you're obligated to say it on a cup of wine. That's the Surat Takana. Therefore, you don't have to go back. That's the right language. Fine. Itmanami. We also, it's been said also in the name of Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, this same halacha. So now let's go through this. Amar Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet, Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet testified something that he saw with his own two eyes, as he's going to say. Say, I was there. He's going to say it. So Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet said, Sha'al Rabbi Yossi et Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yossi asked Rabbi Yochanan in the city of Sidon. And there are those who say it was Rabbi Shimon ben Yaakov that asked Rabbi Yochanan. V'ana shma'it. And I was there, Rabbi Binyamin Bar Yefet says. I heard it with my own ears. Hamavdil betfilah. This is the question Rabbi Yochanan was asked. Hamavdil betfilah, sadich she'avdil alakos. If you already said Atah honantanu in the bracha of Chonen Hada'at in tfilah of Motzei Shabbat, sarich she'avdil alakos, lo. Do you have to also say it on a cup of wine when you get home? Or maybe no, it's sufficient to say it in tefillah. Ve'amale, and Rabbi Yochanan answered him. What did Rabbi Yochanan answer? Of course you have. Sarich she'avdil alakos. You have to say it also on a cup of wine. Ibaya lehu, they asked in the Bet Midrash, hamavdil alakos ma'u she'avdil betfilah. How about the reverse case? You said Havdalah before you davened Arvit, right? You took a very long Shabbat nap, right? And when you woke up, it was already nighttime. They're saying Havdalah. So you listened to Havdalah, you were Yotzeh, and now you have to daven Arvit. Do you have to say Atah honantanu in that Arvit? Or do you say, well, I did an official Havdalah on a cup of wine, beautiful. Maybe you don't have to. Says, what do you mean you don't have to? It's a Kal Vachomer. Remember, what was the original takana of Havdalah? That was the original takana. And Sheikh Gdolah's first takana was in Tefillah. And yet, if you said in Tefillah, which is the Ikar takana, the main thing, you still have to say it on the cup. So of course, the reverse, you have to say it in the Tefillah. The Ikar, the main one, is Tefillah. The cup of wine is Tafel. If you said the main one, you still have to say this. So of course, if you said this, you have to still say the main one, right? That's the logic of the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Amar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman says, what do you mean? Kal vachomer. It's a kal vachomer. Mitfilah, umat filah. Just like tfilah, that it's ikar takanta, is the main takana of Anshe Knesset Gedolah, that Havdalah should be said in the tfilah. Amri hamavdil betfilah sarich she'avdil alakos. And yet, even though that you have said Havdalah in the tfilah, you still have to say it on the cup of wine. Hamavdil alakos. If you didn't even do the main one, you just did the secondary one on a cup of wine, which is not ikar takanta. It's not the ikar of the takara, the institution. No kol sheken. Isn't it the kol sheken? Isn't it for sure that you have to go back and say it again in the tefillah? Of course it is. So when you daven Arvit, after you woke up from that long nap, you do say Havdalah in Atah honeh. Gewaldik. Here is where it starts. This is Gishmak. Tani Rab Acha Arichta, Kameh de Rav Chinina, Rab Acha Aricha, said in front of Reb Chinena, "Hamavdil betfilah meshubach yoter mimi sheyavdil al hakos, ve'im hivdil bezu ubezu yanuchu lo berachot al rosho." If someone does, if you want to compare the two, if you want to compare saying Havdalah in tefillah versus saying Havdalah al hakos, on a cup of wine, which one is more important? Which one is more praiseworthy? Which one is better? Says the Gemara, that already, the way we explain this, that the original institution of Chazal in Anshe Ksesta Gdola was to say it in tefillah, we already know that the Ikar is tefillah, that's more meshubach. Fine, Kvaldi. Here is where the problem is. He says, if you did both of them, Yanuchu brachot al rosho. If you did both of them, Hashem will shower you with bracha, which, by the way, indicates you don't have to say both of them, unlike what we just finished saying, but it's a midat chasidut, which indicates that with one of them you're already yotzeh. With one of them you've done what you're supposed to do, but if you do extra one, gewaldig, right? You hear the diuk. The diuk is, unlike what we just said, we just got finished saying that you have to say both of them. It was the original takana, you have to do both of them, right? He's not saying that. He's saying, if you did, this is better than that, but if you do both of them, even though that you don't have to do both of them, then it's chazaku baruch. It's gewaldig, right? That's what it's mashma. So once you don't have to do both of them, the Gemara drops a bombshell in this. The Gemara says, wait a second. Hagufa kasha. What you said makes absolutely no sense. Amrat, you just got finished saying, you just got finished saying that if you say Havdalah in tefillah, it is better than someone that says Havdalah on a cup of wine. Which indicates, Alma, you're clearly indicating tefillah lechudach sagi. That tefillah alone is sufficient, is enough. So if the tefillah alone is enough, unlike what we just said, and you don't have to say Havdalah on a cup of wine, says the Gemara, then you come and say, if you do both of them, Hazaku Baruch is better. What do you mean Hazaku Baruch? Once you already did all of your obligation in saying it in tefillah, you're completely yotzeh, and you're not expected to say the second one. How in the world are you allowed to say the second one? We all know the concept of bracha she'ena sricha. Says the Gemara, v'havya bracha she'ena sricha. It's an unnecessary bracha. You think unnecessary brachot are good? Absolutely not. Ve'amar Rav, ve'itemar Resh Lakish. We know in the name of Rav, or Resh Lakish, ve'amri la Rabbi Yochanan, ve'Resh Lakish, ve'amri Tarvayu, and there are those who say Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, both of them say, Kol ha'mevarech bracha she'ena sricha. Anybody that says an unnecessary bracha, he goes straight to a very hot place, right? Over mishum lo tisa. He is in transgression of one of the 10 commandments, the third of them. Lo tisa et shem Hashem Elokecha lashav, ki lo yenakeh Hashem et asher yisa et shemo lashav. Do not mention Hashem's name in vain, because if you do, Hashem will not forgive you. The third commandment. Now, this, if you have a few minutes at the end, I'll explain this. This is a machloket Rambam in Hilchot Berachot and elsewhere as well. In Perek Aleph, I think it is with the Tosafot in Masechet Rosh Hashanah Daf Lamed Gimel. If it's a Isur Deoraita or is it Isur Derabbanan? Rambam holds is the full-fledged Isur Deoraita. If you said Sha'akol on this and then you forgot and a minute later he says Sha'akol again, you just transgressed the Torah law, according to Rambam. The Tosafot in Rosh Hashanah Lamed Gimel say it's not Isur Deoraita because you're mentioning Hashem's name in the context of praise. So therefore, it's not Isur Derabbanan. What's the halacha? Paskins, right? Like Rambam. The Rama Paskins, like Tosafot and the Rosh, right? So that's the halacha for us is much more severe for for the Sfaradim than it is for the Ashkenazi. But nevertheless, we'll see if we get a chance to come back to this and explain some very, very gishmak and pleasureful rate. But for now, the Gemara says, wait a second. If you already did what you're supposed to do in the first bracha, and you're not expected to say it on a cup of wine, how in the world are you allowed to say it on a cup of wine? In other words, I could deal with what we just did 3 lines ago, that just like Kiddush, by Haftarah also you have to say them both. That was the institution. But if you tell me that was not the institution, and you don't have to do it. If you want to do only tefillah, chazaku baru. You want to do only chazak. So then what? Who allows you to do both? You shouldn't be allowed to do both. Says the Gemara. Therefore, you're wrong. You can't say it like that. If you only do it in one, that's when you will have bracha. Last line. Rav Chisda asked Rav Sheshet, Mahu, if you made a mistake in both of them, what's the halacha? If you made a mistake in both of them, then you go back and daven again. So now, what does it mean? What do you mean bezu? What does it mean? Tefillah, I could understand. You finished your tefillah, right? And you didn't say Havdalah. That's clear how you could make mistake. But when you came home and you haven't yet said Havdalah, and your wife says, "Oh, you made a mistake. You didn't say Havdalah." I said, "No, I haven't said it yet." And I said in 5 minutes, right? So I mean, how do you make a mistake when you're home on a cup? So it's either you waited 3 days, if you have Havdalah until Tuesday, and you didn't say it, or simply you started eating. It's asur to eat before Havdalah, right? So you start saying, "Amotzi min haaretz," and the big pie of pizza, and start eating, and your wife comes and says, "Did you say Havdalah?" So that's ta. Or even drinking. So if no drinking, that's why I bedavka stayed out of drinking, because water is mutar mikaratin. But if you're in the middle of the pie, right, and your Rebbetzin comes and says Hazaku Baruch, then you didn't say Havdalah in tefillah. And she says, "Did you at least say the tefillah?" I said, Then she said, "Get up. We have dress job again. You have to daven arvit," and that's the halacha, right? If you missed atachon antanu in tefillah, and you came home, you missed saying Havdalah, and you ate, you have to daven arvit again, right?
This next morning.
Next, right there and then, you have to daven arvit again. Says the Gemara, you have to go back to the beginning. Says the Gemara, first line, top line. Says Ravina to Rava, what's the halacha at the end of the day? Why is there a suffix? Because even though that we had so much precedent, 3 different braitas and memoras that you say it in both in tefillah and in on a cup, because we threw it off with this memra that you may not be able to say it in both because maybe bracha she'ena sricha. So that prompted Rava to ask this, Ravina to ask this question. Ravina asks Rava, what is l'maaseh ba'adim lain halacha? Do we say it in both, or are we scared for bracha she'ena sricha? Amalei said, ki kiddush. No, it is like kiddush. Just like by kiddush, the institution originally was to say them both. When they went back the 3rd time and reinstituted Havdalah in the tefillah, they also made it me'en kiddush. They made it like kiddush. Just like by kiddush, you say mekadesh Shabbat in tefillah of arvit of Shabbat, and then you come home, that which is considered kiddush, and then you come home and you say kiddush again, mekadesh Shabbat on a cup. By Havdalah also, the institute that you say atachon antanu in the tefillah, and you go back home and you say the bracha of hamavdil on a cup. So that's the halacha. Afal gavda mekadesh b'selota. Just like by kiddush, afal gavda mekadesh b'selota. Even though that in tefillah you say mekadesh Shabbat, you come back home on mekadesh akasa. You say it on a kos chilayin again. Of Havdalah, so too Havdalah. Nami also afal gavda mavdil b'selota. Mavdil akasa. Even though that you say it in tefillah, you go back home and you say it on a cup of wine again. Fine. 2 dots, 4 lines down. Rabbi Eliezer Omer behoda. So the last part of the Mishnah was the third shita, Havdalah, the Talakama holds, you say it in Chonen Hadat. Rabbi Akiva says you say a bracha b'fnei atzma, a 20th bracha, and separate bracha for Chonen Hadat. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you say it in Hoda'ah, which is in Modim, right? Rabbi Zera Havarachi B'chamra. This is a very complicated sugya with tons and loads of questions on it. We're not going to get into the details of it. We're going to read it kindergarten level, simple, make it sound simple. But what we're going to make sound simple is really, there's a lot of depth, a lot of questions could be asked, should be answered, should be dealt with, but is above the pay grade of us, our short time, and above the scope of this shiur. So it says, Rabbi Zera was riding on a donkey. Rabbi Bar Avin was riding or walking behind him, was going with him. He said, is it true that you say halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer on a Yom Tov that's after Shabbat? In other words, a Yom Tov that's on Sunday. So Motzei Shabbat is not a Yom Chol, is not a regular mundane weekday, but it is a Yom Tov. You're going from Shabbat to Yom Tov, right? And how do you say Havdalah in a tefillah of Arvit of Yom Tov? Then you're coming from Mincha of Shabbat, and then you say Arvit of Motzei Shabbat, which is a Yom Tov. Is it true that you say the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, that you say it in Modim, you say Havdalah in Modim, or not? That's what I want to know. Says the Gemara, Amaleh in halacha. Said yes. Halacha is like this. When you say, what's the question and answer exactly over here? When you say in, it is halacha, you're indicating that there is a need for saying who's halacha like, which indicates that there is a machloket, right? If there's no question, you're not going to say, no, what halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. You only need to say that if there is in the background, there's a machloket. What is the machloket, says the Gemara? Isn't it pashut that halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer in a Yom Tov after Shabbat? By the way, you don't have atachonen in a tefillah of Yom Tov, right? It's atah behartanu. There's only 7 brachot that you say in the tefillah of Yom Tov. So there's no atachonen. So realize the backdrop of the Gemara is normally we say atachonen tanu in atachonen. Gewaltig. But there is no atachonen in a tefillah of Yom Tov. So isn't it pashut that it has to be halacha like Rabbi Eliezer? Also, halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva. We know that. Don't say it's a separate bracha. So what are you left with exactly? You with me? Okay. Says the Gemara. Halacha michlal lepligi. When you say halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, are you indicating that there's a backdrop of a machloket before you say that? The Gemara says, what do you mean? Velo pligi. You want to say that there is no machloket? Well, you didn't learn the Mishnah. Rabbanan, that says, Vehapligi Rabbanan. Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer. Chachamim only argue when you have a bracha of, no, atachonen. Chachamim say you say it in chonen adat, because you have the bracha of chonen hadat on a weekday. Emor bepaligi Rabbanan b'shar yemot hashana. Chachamim only argue in the rest of the days of the year when you have a tachonen. B'yom tov shchal liyot achar Shabbat mi pligi. In a Yom Tov that falls to be on Motzei Shabbat, where would Chachamim put it? There is no chonen hadat. So who said? Where do you get that from? The Chachamim would disagree with Rabbi Eliezer on a Yom Tov that's on Motzei Shabbat. You don't have Chonen Hadat. You don't go like Rabbi Akiva. So you're only left with Rabbi Eliezer, right? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva argues. Rabbi Akiva holds what? Are you what? Separate bracha. You say a 19th or a 20th bracha, separate bracha by itself. Then the Gemara really gets upset. He says, what? How in the world do you suggest halacha should be Rabbi Akiva? We never pass like Rabbi Akiva by this. During the year, do we pass like Rabbi Akiva? Then now you have to say halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva. We know halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva. Nobody passes like Rabbi Akiva by this. The hashta niku v'nabit kivateh, that now we should get up and do like him. And then the Gemara explains the reasoning behind it also. You know why we don't do like Rabbi Akiva during the course of the year? Because Anshe Knesset Gdola instituted 18 brachot and not 19 brachot. And therefore, we don't say like Rabbi Akiva because he institutes a whole new bracha just for Motzei Shabbat. You can't do that. Right? That's why halacha is not like Rabbi Akiva. And just like that logic holds by a weekday, that logic should hold by a Yom Tov that's on Motzei Shabbat also. Because we just learned a few pages ago that just like Anshe Knesset Gdola instituted 18 brachot for a regular Shemona Esrei, they also instituted 7 brachot for Shabbat and 7 brachot for Yom Tov, right? And then we had 9 brachot for Rosh Hashanah. We went through the whole thing, right? It's their institution. And if they said 7, we cannot make it 8. According to Rabbi Akiva, it will be 8 because you're making on Motzei Shabbat, you're making 8th bracha. And that's why halacha is not like it. Kol hashana kula, let's read it inside. Now, kol hashana kula, my ta'ama lo avdinan Rabbi Akiva. Why is it that we don't do like Rabbi Akiva during the course of the year? Because the Tamni Sari Tikkun, they instituted 18. Tashsari lo Tikkun, they did not institute 19. Hachanami Shav Tikkun, here also in Yom Tov, they instituted 7 brachot to be said. Tamni 8 lo Tikkun, they did not say. Amaleh. Lav halacha itmar ela matin itmar. So here becomes a little complex. So just give me your ears and minds and hearts for 15 seconds and we'll be good, right? Remember, 10 lines ago, the question that was posed was, why are you telling me halacha is like Rabbi Elazar? I know! I should know by myself that halacha is like him, right? I should know that halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer because we don't have atahonim. So why do you have to tell me, yes, halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, and a Yom Tov that falls to be on Sunday, on Motzei Shabbat? When you say halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, what are you indicating? Don't I know myself that halacha should be like him? By process of elimination, the halacha is not Rabbi Akiva, I know. Halacha can't be like Rabbanan because there's no atahonim. So you're only left with Rabbi Eliezer. So what's the chidush? What are you teaching me? What is your chidush that you tell me halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer? Gemara says, you know what the chidush is? Because not everyone says halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. There are others, and I will show you the brightest that they say halacha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. Matin itmar. You know, this is where I have to just spend 15 seconds to explain it. Sometimes in Gemara you have halacha. Halacha means it's, unequivocal. There's no question about it. It's clear. Halacha, you get up by the podium, you darshan it to the whole seat. That's the halacha. Clear cut. Sometimes it's not as clear. It's matin. We are tilted to it, but it's not clear. So therefore, we don't get up by the podium and darshan it. But if someone comes and says, Rabbi Chacham, what is the halacha? We say halacha is like this. But it's not so strong that we get up and publicize it in public. That in the Gemara is called matin. We are tilted towards the shita, but we don't confidently preach it as the halacha. There are 2 sides to it. It is more mistaber, it is more logical that this should be the conduct, the line of conduct, but we don't get up by the podium and dash. That's matin. And then there is even one more halacha, one more level of nir'in. Nir'in means we don't have any tilt in what the halacha is. If you ask me the halacha, I say, I'll go ask someone else, right? We don't know what the halacha is, which, by the way, that by itself has its own halachot. If it's the oraita, you'll be machmir. If it's the rabbanan, you have halachot of safek. What do you do when you have safek? But if you ask me, halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, or halacha is like Rabbanan, or Rabbi Akiva, if it would be nir'in, that means we don't even have a tilt. It's like safek hashakun. We think halakha seems to be more like Rabbi Eliezer, but we don't even have a tilt halachically. If you come in the Bet Midrash and we are discussing it in an intellectual aspect, I'll say halakha seems to be like Rabbi Eliezer. But do I have a halachic tilt when you ask me what to do? I say what to do is equal almost, right? Those are the three levels. Halakha is clear cut halakha. Matin means we are tilted to it. So if you ask me what's the halakha, I'll tell you halakha is like Rabbi Eliezer, but I won't go on the podium and say this publicly. And Nir'in means I won't even tell you as a person that asks me private question, I won't tell you halakha is like Rabbi Eliezer. So equals. And then follow the halachot of Safek, which has halachot we're not getting into now. Right? So those are the three aspects. You with me? You got this, you got the whole thing. That's it. Says the Gemara. Know what the chidush is? Why I have to tell you halakha like Rabbi Eliezer? Because there are those who say halakha is not like Rabbi Eliezer. It's only matin. It's only tilted towards Rabbi Eliezer, the halakha. It's not the clear halakha. Amare, la halakha itmar ela matin itmar. Because the others say it's only matin, the itmar, and this is the braita. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Amar Mishum Rabbeinu. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said in the name of Rabbeinu. Who's Rabbeinu, Rabotai? We said this before. Rav, right? One of the nicknames of Rav and Shmuel, Rav, is Rabbeinu, our master, our Rebbe. Halakha. So Rav holds is halakha. Halakha is like Rabbi Eliezer. It's clear cut. You get up by the podium and you dash it. Ve'amrila, and there are those who say no. He didn't say halakha. He said matin, which means if someone privately asks you, you say halakha is like Rabbi Eliezer. But by the podium, you won't dash it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan said modim. Rabbi Yochanan said that chachamim of the Mishnah agree with Rabbi Eliezer in a Motzei Shabbat case, because you don't have a Tachon and Tanu. So what are you going to do? You're going to say it in Modim. Rabbi Chaya bar Abba said Nir'in. Rabbi Chaya bar Abba said it's even worse. It's not halakha and it's not matin. It's the third category, which is called Nir'in. So we don't have a clear-cut halakha. Amar Rabbi Zera said, which one of these three is halakha? Nekot Rabbi Chaya bar Abba biyadech. We should hold like Rabbi Chaya bar Abba, which is the last one, which is Nir'in. Why? The Dayik v'gamar shmata b'pod mare. Because he is the one that was the most specific, Rabbi Chaya bar Abba, of quotation of his Rabbi exactly the way it was said. Like this guy, this Chacham, that his name was Rachava in the city of Pumbedita, the Amar Rachava said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, exactly the way Rabbi Yochanan had mentioned the halakha. Tomorrow we're going to explain this, Bezrat Hashem, and finish it up to the Mishnah and continue from there, Bezrat Hashem.